we've had 5 years of therapy.
Yeah, maybe 6, certainly a long stretch.
And there's still this this problem of the woman that keeps coming back and niggling away at you. You're trying to come to terms with this female image.
Yeah.
And you decide at this point that you want to take a long journey
Yeah.
to get away from it all. Just let's go somewhere else
Yeah.
and see what a new environment throws
Right.
back at me.
Yeah, right.
And how I respond to that new environment.
Right.
So you don't do anything by half. You go all the way to New Zealand.
Yes, I'd make a long trip. I had a good excuse because I had my son there getting married, or he'd get married. This is my second visit, and I knew where he lived in Auckland. So it was a good opportunity to go and see her and her
were
children.
Determined to deal with this woman within during that trip.
I think, yeah, it's not a bad way of putting it, I think, yes. So off I go, and let's have this flight over. I'm talking about spreading the wings now. I've been dealing with it in these images now. Now I wanted to take off and become a bird and fly over there. And it was a long way to go, a very long way to go. So I set off, and I carried a lot of equipment with me, lots of drawing material and so on. So I can do.
What year?
What year?
Yes. Wasn't it? It's in the mid-90s. Mid-90s.
It must be about then,
Yeah.
yes. I haven't got it down,
About
haven't
20 years ago.
I never wrote that. Yes, I'm coming up towards not the end of the programme I'm writing about, drawing about, but well on in the stage, yes. It's 2 years after the two scenes we've just been dealing with. But it's funny you asked that, and I haven't got a date.
Yeah. I think, from my reading of it, it's about mid-90s.
It could be. Anyway, it's the Land of the Long White Clouds. That's a lovely title for the place. And it means, I can't pronounce it, the Land of the Long White Clouds. And I've drawn a picture, a very naturalistic one, which occasionally I do, of the Southern Alps. And one of the greatest mountains is there in the centre here.
And it's a surprise to come upon this in the book after
all
the
pictures
that's come before.
Yes.
We've just been through all the trauma of those
yeah.
really quite difficult drawings, and suddenly we come on this sort of.
Well, I think it was a break. I had to earn a living as well, and so I did portraits that would sell. That was part of it. However, we will turn a page, and this is my introduction. You may have other things to put, and I go to Napier a little later. Before that, no, this is all Napier scenes here. I don't deal with the very beginning because I spent a little time in Auckland with the family. And I tour part of the north. I'd known the north from a previous visit 5 years earlier for the marriage of my daughter. And I did a bit of touring, and I go down to this image here, Napier. Napier was famous for quite a large explosion that occurred a few years earlier. Did I put a date on it? I did.
1931.
Yes, there was a
the
very
Napier
large earthquake in 31.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is one of my version scenes of after the earthquake. Everything stewed up and turning, ragged edges, houses falling, little birds unaffected out at sea. It was a marvellous place. I don't think I have any scenes of Napier itself except for a picture at the top, which I may or may not have here, that I drew at the time.
The Charles Boat.
There it is, I have it,
Yes.
good. Here we are. I should explain. I went to Napier. It's a wonderful new town now, and built in quite an interesting style. And while I was there, I was painting and drawing a lot. And while I was drawing on the coast of Napier, on the beach, I noticed a lot of boats around, and I was drawing this sketch, or something very like it. And a fella came up, and he said, "Oh, I like that, how much?" And I said, "Oh, well, about 300. He said, "Oh, I can't possibly afford that." He thought, that's a lot of money, £300. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Well, that's all I can afford." He said, "I'll do a deal with you. You can come and stay in my hotel up on the hill for a few days and do me a painting of it, and I'll give you free board, full board, everything you want for a week or so." And I thought, that's quite a good deal.
One of the advantages of being a painter.
So in fact, when I was in New Zealand, that's how I paid my way. I did paintings that would sell,
Yes.
And that way I could move around. But almost the same day, I was in the middle of an interesting experience. I was invited to go out on a trip to New Zealand on a big boat, big one. And he was an interesting guy. He produced one of the great fruits of New Zealand, and Prima. No, I can't remember the name of it now. Prima? Forgotten the name. And this is a storm at sea. But before that storm, I was sitting on a relatively calm beach there, with many people aboard, and we were going to take off. And we were talking and have a jolly time for an hour or two. And then warnings came that a storm was due. And it was very disappointing because I was hoping for a really good trip out into the sea around that area. And he said, awfully sorry, it's got to be called off, a big storm's due. So I stayed there on the shore until I saw it coming. It was a huge wave and storm. And I went back to Shakespeare's Tempest.
Yes.
And I remember that amazing open scene where they have a great storm on stage and everything's chaos and everything. We all know that scene if we've been to see that play. And I've got the storm here. Yeah. Here I am in the middle of the storm, the imaginative storm that was taking place.
This image has always intrigued me because at one level it's a fairly bland image. Mm-hmm. It's not a very exciting image in terms of drawing into it, although there's a lot of energy within it. But every time I look at it, I see things that recur elsewhere.
Right.
So we've actually got a bird in here. There's the beak.
Oh, well, you're...
Here's the skull. And most interestingly, this is, for me, is a precursor to the Earth Mother images that occur in the final part of the book, where you're engaging with the local landscape in England, and out of that landscape comes some resolution with the Earth Mother. But this is where I see the first signs of it in this particular image. So yeah. I think it's an important image.
Right.
It's a fairly dark image, and it's...
Oh, it's very dark, yes.
But you know, there's lots of other bits of the story in the image.
Yes, good. May I just intrude here a moment? You mentioned the mother again. The impression is, if you hadn't listened to our programme on the last section of my mother, the very first section, the implication was she was a rather dreadful woman and a bit of an ogre and so on. She was no such thing. As I mentioned in that part, she was rather damaged herself and had a very tough life and was, in fact, was a charming woman. Yes. But that doesn't always come out in these dark images. Anyway,
there's one other point here just to pick up on, Chris, that you mentioned in the book, because it's around this time in your trip to New Zealand that you say in the book that you try to overcome this tendency to rush.
Right.
And this recurs, you mentioned this several times, the need just to slow down and just to let things happen in their own time rather than forcing the pace.
Right.
Do you want to say anything about that now, or would it be opportune?
Yes, you touch on it by all means.
To say something, yes. You felt that you had to leave behind this tendency to get from A to B or from one thing to the next, and just to be patient, to watch, look, and listen more intently, and to let things happen in their own time.
Yes.
And within this section of the book, there does seem to me to be this alternation between things which have got all that energy of rushing in them, but also very, very calm imagery as well. So a calmness does come into the work, but it's intermittent.
Well, I think I chose the word joker right at the start because he seemed to me an agitated sort of guy. You'll notice in all the work that comes throughout the book, it's not consistently like other parts of the book. I jump from one place to another. My work constantly changed, and I think I never really was successful as a big artist in the terms of grand scenes, and I kept at it. I moved from one place to another, or I got fed up with one kind of drawing, and I moved to another place of drawing. And that occurred again and again. But I think that was related to my breakdown, which caused this disturbance to take place. Hence this feeling of shifting and moving about rather rapidly and not being calm. But I had calm moments as well, of course. So
Well, take us on with the
right.
story in New Zealand. Where do we
Okay.
go next?
Well, we've been to, yes, we're going to South Island. Now, South Island is a very exciting place indeed. It's an extraordinary place. And let me take another scene from it on the way down. Well, I'm going to places where all sorts of strange things happen, so let's take a few of the scenes from it. Here we are on South Island. And I called this New Zealand Christmas. I did this over there, did a scene of this rather remarkable place. It's not even in South Island, it's right at the tip, right at the very bottom, a tiny little bay that sticks out. And what do we call it? It's got a name.
Is Stewart Island?
Stewart.
Mm.
So here we are on Stewart Island, quite a short crossing, no boats on it. They don't have boats there. It's too small and too hilly. And this is one of my settling places when I was tripping around. A little cottage here at the base, lovely place. And you have a scene alongside it, I believe.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
No, go back a page, one page before. Here we are. This image at the top. Can we get an image of that? I was walking this coast for an hour or two and came across this single boat along the shore here. It's a lovely spot. And I found a lady there who'd come from Scotland many, many years ago. She set this place up and she offered tea and coffee and reception, everything you wanted. And I liked watching. And she said, "Oh, you're an artist. Could you do a drawing for me for this scene?" That's the drawing I did. She wanted to advertise her place. And that's it. That's the sketch. And I stayed there for 3 days and did these drawings, and that paid for my lodgings for the next few days. And I looked out, and at night there's this wonderful scene stretching out. There's a little boat on the harbour here. It had come over from, forgotten where it came from. I think I mentioned it somewhere, but I can't see. It's down the bottom.
Yes, from Muttonbird Islands.
Oh, the Muttonbird Islands out here.
Yes.
There's the Muttonbird Islands. The Maoris lived off these birds. And these are birds that buried themselves in the rock above. There's another name for...
I've eaten one.
Yeah.
It actually tastes like a piece of putty.
Well, I'm glad I didn't have one. But anyway, it had a nice romantic sound to it. I like that. And they stood just up the shore and went, it wasn't very high ground. I elaborated this. I stretched out the land and made all the little bits of colours and dropped it in. I thought it made a good Christmas card. So that's my Christmas card for that particular scene. Now,
okay, tell us a bit about this very powerful image.
Yeah, I wanted to go and see a volcano. Now, I knew they existed. There weren't many. There's one called White Island off the southern shore of that side of the coast. And I cannot remember the coast. I might have written it down somewhere, but I don't seem to have done. But St Maris took me out there. We had to go across many metres of water. It took an hour to drive there at full speed. And we landed at this place. Well, we didn't see volcanoes of this order. This is fantasy. But I have a very tiny photograph that you might be able to photograph from that distance and just see. Can you get in close to something as small as this?
Yeah. This is the actual volcano itself, isn't it?
That is the actual island I'm standing on.
Yeah.
New Island. And we land there and we got a few hours to spare. In the distance is the actual volcanic things. And there are 5 of us. We're all going out. I've dropped my haversack and I'm taking a photograph. And there they are walking towards that. And that's, when we took off later, I got a high view of it looking down. And there's the equator at the top end there. Amazing place.
Let's go back to the main image, if you take away this.
Yes,
Chris.
well, no, I came up to this, and this is what I came back to England with and drew later. It felt like this rather. I have... let's move this away a moment and look at the rock. So here's with the volcano itself, steaming forth, and I've sort of got a figure here. I've got a bird reclining there, other images here. They're all very vague.
Yes.
And the great face of one of the creature looking at us, so to speak. So it's a pure fantasy image. And here's me lying down at the top, so I've been spewed out from it all. So you can make of it what you will.
Yes, well, it's subtle at this time in that the imagery is there, the hidden imagery or the unknown breaking through, but it's much more subtle this time. And what I've always found fascinating about this particular image is the use of colour. How colour now it's the colour that really brings this imagery out.
It is much stronger, isn't it? Yes, I agree.
So something's happening, something else is coming into the whole mix now. There's a lightness that's coming through the colour.
I think one saw colour there in a way you never see it. The clarity of air in New Zealand is extraordinary. There's no mist, there's no fog. Well, you get fog, yes, but you don't get smoke, which destroys him. You can look right across from one side of South Island, right across to the other side, and you'll see the distant Alps, miles and miles away. It seems incredible. That's what it was like then. We'll put that down a moment. And so that image came, and while I was still in the middle part of the country, I had one or two other little dream sequences. The top one is me embracing a sort of owl, a sort of image.
This one here.
Yes. Very strange. What a tiny thing it is.
Boy on a whale, you call it.
Hmm?
Boy on a whale.
Yeah, read it if you like.
Yeah. I took a trip on a whale watching boat and saw 3 of these great mammals surfacing for 15 minutes or so. Later, to my surprise, I found it made a childlike freestyle version of a beached whale with a boy hugging its back. Sorry, that's what
That's the one.
produced.
Yeah.
Yes. Totally unrealistic, yet somehow appropriate. The boy is in possession of his own dream.
Yes.
Now that's a lovely.
Yes, so that's the dream.
Yes.
And behind it, great clouds and the moon up. It had all its image there. At that same period of time, I was looking at another sort of, and I turned myself into a totally different sort of creature now, and I'm down on the shore, and I'm stroking one of the creatures in the water, as if I'd become part of them, or one of them.
Almost like a walrus.
Yes,
here.
strange.
Yes.
My drooping hand, I've already semi-transformed into another creature altogether. Very strange one.
Back to this one, Chris, because the boy taking possession of his dream, the lightness is there, but still there's this darkness in the background. It's against a dark backdrop.
Yes, I think that sets it off, though. And it was such a white image at the top. I think I made it dark because it needed that. I can't explain any other reason for it, But yes, you could see it like that. Right, and now, while I'm still in this part of the country, I visit, let me see, Otago, part of the middle part of the country there. And I see some of these images in the museum.
Yes.
These are Maori images, and how striking they are. And then I came across one of them, top right, of
roaring bravado.
And I suddenly thought, there's a Joker again in a way.
Yes.
He's a weird creature altogether. So somebody there had invented this creature, this image.
Well, this is interesting, isn't it? Because I'd assumed all along that this was actually one of your images.
Oh no, I'd copied.
Because here's the fish again.
Well, yes.
It's actually your Joker.
No, well, yes, I can say it is.
Yeah.
I know it was, in fact, not at all. It's by one of the people in the Solomon Islands.
Well, how interesting that they've come up with, it's a similar sort of imagery.
Well, that you can pick up from others, can't you, very
Yes.
often. And just as Sutherland, I saw some of his images, I
But you
thought,
had no
that's mine.
experience of the Solomon Islands when you did
No, I'd never
your
been
original
there.
Joker.
No, it's very
So
odd.
again, it's uncanny, the likeness
Yeah.
that's here.
And here are other images I find in the place, little heads. The Maoris saved the heads, or did at a certain time, and remade them and put them in their homes. And
Yes.
it's a weird little creature down there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And here's a much bigger one with a very fierce face to it. And I thought that was a wonderful thing. But again, it was a straight drawing, his drawing, New Zealand from the, hold on, I've got the island there somewhere. The Bismarck
Archipelago.
New Ireland it was called.
Yeah.
I've no idea where that was. So these are very interesting images from the middle part of the country. And then I turned again, and here's some of the scenes I saw around me at that time. Here's a beauty, the one at the top.
Yes. Horseshoe Bay.
Horseshoe Bay. This is where I was staying. Let's keep it straight if we can. Perhaps it'll fold over. That's it.
Yeah.
Horseshoe Bay, and I looked out at this scene. It was a wonderful scene. Japanese fishing village had come over, and they unload the stock there at that island. Quite a distance to travel. They took a big stock over to here where they had a tanning factory. And they discovered a new fish, they claimed, and it was going to be very expensive. A lovely fish, apparently. I never tasted it.
And just below the
and these are the Button Islands.
Yes, Muttonbird Islands.
Muttonbird Islands again. And look at these patterns that came in the water at that time. Very strange. I sat there that day, and that was the last day in that cottage where they'd put me up briefly. And I knew I couldn't stay long because you got new guests, and I had to go all the way back, which I wasn't happy about. And I thought, if ever I was going to settle, this is it. I don't want to go back. I want to stay here for the rest of my days. That's how good it felt. And it was a wonderful place. And yet, on the very next page, something happened.
Yes.
And it needs a bit of a reading of that one, really. I could briefly run through it. This quest for the South was the essence of the journey. The desire to find the creative child again. I will listen to the
Shall I read, Chris?
Yes, you read on.
I realised that despite any possible adventures ahead, emotionally I'd found a cure for the years of depression and repression.
Yeah.
The painting Evening at Horseshoe Bay contained the embryo about the leap through the birth canal and held the moment of rebirth. It was the moment also when I could retrace my steps. Everything else would later be coloured by this revelation. So you describe it as a revelation.
Well, it is. This is an amazing scene. This is the same place I was in before, but a little way round from the other side. And the sun is setting. There's the distant bay. Here's the water, very rich in colour. And a little creature here. And I couldn't make out at all at first. And I thought, what the devil's that? And of course it's the rebirth. I'm about to go through the birth channel out. Yeah. And there's a little figure to the right that may be reclining and resting. But I thought, this is the birth. This is where I better stay, because this is a happy place to be. All the palms were displaying their leaves, all rich and deep in colour, lots of dark blues. And it was the ideal place. So I'm not moving on. Yeah. That was the feeling.
Yeah.
I had no choice, of course. I was to move on. But
it's even more subtle, this one, than the image that we were discussing earlier, where, again, you know what's in there, but it's less obvious.
I have to point it out, I think, really.
Viewer looking at this.
Yeah.
So is that indicative of some sort of integration that's emerging here, do you think, where these things are coming together in a much more coordinated or coherent way?
I think it was while I was on holiday. The mood was swinging towards this resolution of staying there, and I knew I was ready to move on, but at that moment I didn't want to. This is where I'm stopping. Yeah. That was the feeling.
This is in many respects, although it's busy, it's very peaceful.
Yes, it is, and it's quite rich in colour. And, so I was quite satisfied with that. So that resolved that bit of the day. And then I moved up to other parts of the island. All sorts of things were happening. Here we are in another bay. This is an interesting part. Where unless you want to call me up on, you could show my old boat that I used if you just passed it.
Your
next page, I think you see.
The car, you mean?
The car, which was always breaking down and leading to all sorts of trouble.
It's an old Hillman Hunter, I think, isn't it, this one here?
And it broke down about, I think I said 15 times.
Which you hired for
I hired for £100. And when I got back, I sold it for the same amount, so I was quite happy about that. And yes, there was the old thing I travelled on.
So where are we now? Where have we moved to with this image?
This is part of North Island, a middle island.
Yeah.
And here, on the shores there, you find many, many great rucks have been pulled up. The beaches there are extraordinary. The storms are so fierce that these roots are taken out of the sides of the mountains and so on, and they wash out to sea, and you get many of them landing on beaches, making these extraordinary shapes. I was amazed at that. I've never seen such great thinks
And of
is it.
course, this has influenced some of your much more recent work. And I've only made the connection now, sitting here looking at these. But in this very room,
Right.
we've got sculptural pieces that you've made from roots of trees.
Oh yes, I don't know if we could drag that in now or not.
Well, no, but at some point we might look at that, because
Yeah.
I've just made the connection that something that happened 20 years ago has had such an influence on much more recent work.
Well, it's a point. Yes, yes, I'll take that on board. It's possible. So there was that, and I'll turn it over, and then, while still in South Island, I see these great palms rearing up, and here's the colours all ablaze, isn't it? Very powerful colour.
Yes.
And this is what it was like. It was stormy with colour.
Yeah.
And then, finally, on the last page here, I called it Opago Journey. This is another part of the South Island. Oh, I've turned it right. That's the correct view. And here's a little house where I stayed. You see the moon in it? That's my home of residence, so to speak, while I travel around. The sun's setting again. It always seems to be setting there for some reason, the end of the day. The distant shoreline, great sweeping lines coming round. These great globules, goodness knows, part of dream, maybe. And another swinging figure down here. So, and that was the end of that sequence.
Yes.
And it rounded out that part of the hut.
What's going on here, Chris?
Well, that's part of this. It's getting smaller and smaller,
Right.
and it's just centering into this
Yeah.
area. It has.
I must say, I've never been able to make any sort of sense of that image. It's a powerful image in terms of its composition and use of colour, but I couldn't fit it in to the themes that you developed earlier. But you've just given us a.
Well, yes,
and it's
I don't
also
know.
very popular.
It was
People
one. It was
enjoyed
very
that.
popular, and 3 or 4 people wanted it, and one person got it in the end. It's not far
Yes.
away from. I know where it is now, and it's.
Right.
Anyway, that was the end of that sequence.